On today's show, did Bogdan Bogdanovic get snubbed for Sixth Man of the Year? We'll get into all of that, as well as a look at the roster, both talent-wise and financially, and we'll get into all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1701 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening here in late April. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel. Right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in terms of dollars in bonus bets guaranteed. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make this your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe to the show and join us anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify, as well as YouTube, and we're really everywhere in the podcasting space. If we can't be found, go ahead and let me know that, and I will get that fixed for you. Speaking of which, it's been a busy week on the show already. I did a two-part episode with my friend Tyler Jones that dropped on Monday. That was a lot of fun, as always, to talk to Tyler, and before that, exit interviews and analysis at the end of the season. Plenty to get to throughout the offseason, and by the way, if it's not already clear, I'll be here the entire way through the draft, through Summer League, through free agency, through all of it. We'll be here locked and loaded. And for the most part, I know this is kind of common sense on some respects, but there is so much to discuss about the Hawks offseason that I'm never going to be able to get into it all in one show. And I know, and honestly, I'm grateful for the interest in the next steps for the Hawks. There's lots going on in Hawks land. Lots will be going on. So I recorded that episode for about 70 minutes or so with Tyler, and we covered a lot of stuff, but no, it couldn't be everything. And don't fear that. I'm going to talk about all the kind of stuff that you want to get into, from DeJounte and Trey to the forward spots, to the next steps at center, to the young guys, to the lottery, to the drafts, etc. Even on this show today, I'll be talking about the financial situation for the Hawks, salary cap wise, luxury tax wise, the roster. So the best thing you can possibly do is to subscribe to the show. And don't just assume that I'm going to touch on everything every episode, but that's the beauty of a show that has 1,700 episodes all in one place. So catch up on that stuff for sure. And I'll probably record, by the way, like 100 or more episodes between now and the time the Hawks play another game. So if you missed something, hopefully it's already been handled on the show. And if not, I will handle it in the future. Or if you want to ask mailbag questions, a good time to go ahead and do that is basically anytime. Go ahead and fire those away on Twitter at Locked On Hawks, also at BT Roll is my personal account there. And if you don't want to do that on Twitter, you can also leave a 5-star rating on Apple to ask questions, as well as you can send them in to lockedonhawks@gmail.com, lockedonhawks@gmail.com. Anyway, so all that said, we're always taking questions, and I'll have a great need for them as we go through this offseason, because there's always stuff to talk about. But today's show is going to be two big topics, basically. The first is Bogdanovic being, in my mind, snubbed for an award, Sixth Man of the Year. And at the end of the show, we'll talk about the roster for next season, as well as the cap stuff, the tax stuff as it stands right now. I'm recording the show Wednesday, right after the announcement of Sixth Man of the Year was handed out. We already knew earlier this week that Bogey was actually not going to be a finalist in the top three for the award. Finally, now we know that Naz Reid was the winner. Congrats to Naz. He had a great season. Bogey did not even finish fourth. He actually finished fifth in the voting. He did get 4 first-place votes, so I wasn't alone in my thinking about Bogey, but I've been saying for a long time that I thought Bogey should have been a bigger part of the conversation. At the very least, he was being undervalued, and that was kind of magnified today when he wasn't even in the top 4. For the record, I never thought he was going to win, and I did say that repeatedly. I am someone who checks the betting markets regularly. I check the discourse. I'm reading all the stuff, and I don't think it was ever a situation where the public sentiment from voters was going to get him to the top spot. But I do believe he should have been a finalist, very clearly, and honestly, for me, I would have had him number 1 on my list. Again, he got 4 first-place votes, so it wasn't just me that thought this. I listened to some people that I trust around the industry, and people that got into more of the numbers and kind of look beyond the Hawks record, I think was probably the biggest dividing line. But anyway, if you're new to the podcast, I'm not just a homer who's going to pick the Hawks on everything. In fact, this is the only award the Hawks had any chance of winning. Once Jalen Johnson went down for his, he was not eligible for most improved player for games played reasons. But once that happened, once Trey's injury happened, this is the only award the Hawks had any chance of really participating in on any level. And honestly, there's a very clear case for why Bogey should have been higher, if not number 1 on the list. And this is the time I'll do that now. And by the way, after this, I'll probably leave it alone forever, but there you go. Basically, I would say there's 2 broad categories of why he should have been higher. One is individual play / numbers. And the other one is his team impact. So stat-wise, traditionally, I'm not someone who always does traditional stats, but if you want to look at this one, it's a pretty interesting one for him. Bogey led everyone in the NBA that qualified for Sixth Man of the Year in scoring pretty easily. Now, he did start some games, which we'll come back to, but he averaged 17 points a game when starting, and he averaged 16.8 points a game when coming off the bench. So basically the exact amount of stats on both. So it wasn't like he had this huge boom at the end of the year when he was starting because Trey was out. He was already playing at that level production-wise. Traditionally, scoring has been the number one indicator or correlator, however you want to say that, with who wins the award. I'm not saying that's the right move because honestly, there have been times in the past where I thought the winner was not the right pick because they just scored a lot. And look, this year was not an example of that, actually. Naz Reid had a good case. I think that he got a bump from Minnesota's win-loss record, and that was very, very obvious. I think if Naz Reid and Bogey switched places on team record, Bogey wins the award going away, to be honest with you, and Naz would have had no chance. But for some voters, I'm sure that matters quite a bit, and that was very obvious here. But even beyond like the scoring numbers, I think Bogey had a remarkably strong case even beyond the, again, number one in scoring by a clear margin among qualified reserves. He set a franchise record for the Hawks three-pointers this year. And the Hawks are not a new franchise. They've been around for a long time. He was number 6 in the entire NBA in total threes this year. Number 6. That's not 6 among candidates. That's among every single player in the league. Number 6. He was number 3 in the NBA in free throw percentage this year. 90+%. He had 2.2 assists per turnover this year. So like he had really good traditional stats. He's not a huge rebounder. I get that. But he's a decent enough distributor. He never turns the ball over. He scores a lot. He's efficient. Like it was obviously a pretty straight ahead case there. Then you get into the more sort of advanced numbers, and he was 89th percentile in EPM this year among all players. That means you are a top 11 percentile player in the entire league. That's obviously quite good. It was number 2 on the Hawks behind only Trae Young. He actually had a better EPM than DeJounte, better than Jalen. He was 93rd percentile in estimated wins added by EPM. That actually led the team because he played so much more in terms of minutes than Trey did because Trey missed so many more games this year. So it's a cumulative stat, and that's why Bogey was number 1. But on that metric, he was the most total value on the Hawks roster, for instance. And that was not an outlier. He was really high in a lot of metrics across the board. Yes, his defense is not very good. That's not a shock. If you watch the team play, it's not very good. He also doesn't kill you there in the way that some other guys potentially do. And that's just been the numbers. Like his EPM defensively is not terrible. Like his advanced numbers defensively are not that bad. And that kind of bridges the gap to the biggest thing for me. So if you know anything about me, this will not surprise you, but I think the scoring is really interesting and appealing for Sixth Man of the Year purposes. But for me, the trump card is this: the overall impact on the Hawks. So I'm very confident, knowing some voters and just reading into the voting history, all that stuff. A lot of people probably discounted Bogey heavily based on the lack of Hawks success. Number 1, that's kind of silly in my opinion for Sixth Man of the Year. Like for MVP, I get it. You want to be on a good team. I understand. Sixth Man of the Year, it's like, does that really mean you have to be on an awesome team? I would tend to say no. But even if you thought that, go a half step further and look at this. So the Hawks this season had a negative 2.0 net rating. That means they were outscored by 2 points per 100 possessions for the season. That's every minute, every player overall. That's not very good. Obviously, the Hawks were not very good this year. The Hawks had a plus 1.9 net rating when Bogey was on the court. He was the only player on the roster, not Trey, not DeJounte, not Jalen. He was the only player on the roster that had a positive net rating on the court for the Hawks this season. In fact, the closest was Capella, who was at negative 0.1, so almost exactly even. But Bogey was notably the best on-off on the on-side. Here's the big one, though. When Bogey played, they were like a 45 quality win team. That's kind of what that is. Plus 2, 45-ish win team. When Bogey was off the floor, the Hawks had a negative 8.0 net rating. Negative 8 net rating with Bogey on the bench. For context, that would have been between number 26 and number 27 in the league this year. The Hawks were a bottom 5 quality team when Bogey was on the bench. No matter who else was on the floor. It could have been Trey, DeJounte, Hunter, all those guys. Doesn't matter. When Bogey's on the bench, they were awful this year. And I don't mean that flippantly. They were actually awful. Minus 8 net rating is terrible. And to magnify that, Bogey played a ton of minutes. He played 79 games this year. That led the team. He finished 43rd in minutes played this year in the NBA. 43rd. Off the bench. 43rd total. That's among every other player. That includes guys like Jokic, like everybody. 43rd. That's insanely high for a bench player. Someone who actually qualified for Sixth Man of the Year. And yes, I mentioned it before. He did make 33 starts this season. But there is nothing in the criteria that says that's a knock against you. Naz Reid started 14 games too. Like, he started a few games in Bogey, but you're allowed to start games. The only two qualifiers for six man of the year is that there's the new one. You have to qualify for games played reasons, 65 plus games, which Bogey obviously did. And then there's the established qualifier of you have to start less than half of your games. So come off the bench more than half the time, which Bogey did comfortably, easily. That was always going to be the case, even with the late binge of starts for Bogey. So it struck me that people that I know, that I think are some of the sharper people in the industry that have votes or didn't have votes. I know Zach Lowe mentioned this, Nate Duncan, others that I think are smart mentioned Bogey should have been higher on the list. I've not seen the individual voting breakdown, but again, for first place votes. I think the biggest split again was because the Hawks had a poor season overall. And I understand that's some philosophy stuff, but for six man of the year, I wouldn't matter that much on that. And also, again, very clearly, Bogey had a huge impact on the Hawks winning and losing. Six man is not MVP. It is what it is. Is it the biggest deal in the world? No, I'm sure Bogey's not distraught about this, but it was announced today, and I was kind of locked and loaded on doing a little bit of a rant on this. So, look, I would not have been bothered if Bogey didn't win. I thought Bogey should have at least been a finalist. He wasn't. I'm not a homer. I'm not going to sleep poorly tonight because he didn't win. But him being fifth, like, he was behind Norm Powell. Like, he was too low in the voting, and I'll leave it there for now. But he had a really good season. We'll talk about him more when I kind of do my player review stuff later on this summer. But there you have it. Bogey was snubbed in my view, and you can discuss that amongst yourselves if you'd like to. All right, we'll have more coming up on the Hawks state of the roster as well as the cap and tax situation. But first, a word from our friends at DoorDash. It's never too late to show your mom some love this Mother's Day with DoorDash. Surprise mom with flowers or gadgets or self-care essentials all in one place delivered right to her door. Does your mom happen to have a sweet tooth, or is she a tech enthusiast? Is she a beauty connoisseur? Is she outdoorsy? No matter what she happens to be into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and much more. You can pair flowers with a gift card to actually celebrate any way she wants to, or if she prefers something else, try a bookstore or coffee shop gift card as well. You can't go wrong with DoorDash. Choose same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when you need flowers and gifts, and they really should arrive at her door with ease with DoorDash. Shop with savings that make her proud, and with a Dash Pass membership, you also save with a zero delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including service fees, apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15. When you spend $15 plus on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA, or using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go, and I'm not a competitive person. I admit that for sure. I have the competitive side. I think we all do on some level. My competitive side also loves Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it before, but it's been downloaded 150 million times. It's a great twist of Monopoly. We actually just play not just one time, but hundreds of different Monopoly boards in crazy locations, but they have amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part, honestly, is being able to mess with your friends. You can charge them rent on your iconic properties, just like in the classic Monopoly game, or you can rob their vaults of riches for yourself. And the leaderboards also show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is at that point in time. It's not just the competitive side, though, that loves it. You can also team up with friends around the world, people really in your life or out of your life, in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game right now and join your friends by downloading the Monopoly Go app. You can do it out for free on the App Store or Google Play. One more time, download Monopoly Go today. All right, before I dive into the roster, some incentives to finish up from last season. Clint Capella came very close to a $500,000 bonus for in free throw shooting actually this year. He actually came close, at least marginally so. He had to shoot 65% from the free throw line on 150 attempts or more. He got the attempts, but did not shoot quite high enough despite having a really good season at the line for him at 63.1%. That's a 5-year high, not quite enough. The only incentive that actually did happen for a member of the Hawks was DeJounte Murray getting an extra $500,000 for three-point shooting. I mentioned it previously when he actually crossed the threshold. Murray's deal allowed for a $500,000 bonus if he made 125 threes this season. He barely got there last year, so it actually became a quote-unquote likely incentive for this coming season. But this year, he shattered it. He actually made a career-best 201 threes. So DeJounte's growth as a three-point shooter was not just theoretical. He actually made a bunch more threes, took a lot more threes. That was a huge step forward for him, and also made him some extra money. So congratulations to DeJounte on that extra $500,000. With that said, the Hawks ended the season more than $8 million under the luxury tax, which is, in my mind, pretty brutal for a team that was trying to win now. They were in win-now mode. The trade for Murray was win-now mode. They made a lot of moves that were trying to gear towards winning now. They finished with the 9th lowest team salary in the league. And when you remove the teams that weren't trying to win, like the lottery-bound tanking teams this year, they were bottom 3 among teams that I would say were obviously trying to be in win-now mode this year. So the Hawks just did not spend money for the second season in a row. Not a huge surprise there, if you've been paying attention at all. I talked about it a lot at the time, but the Hawks did not use the mid-level exception this season, which they could have used on a rotation player, especially at forward, where they were so thin this season. Instead, they used their last 2 roster spots on Patty Mills and Wes Matthews, who they traded for Patty. He actually was making some real money this year. Obviously, they probably didn't need a third point guard until Kobe got up to speed. So that made some sense, even if Patty was not a huge part of the plan. But they signed Wes Matthews to the minimum, which, by the way, in a vacuum was totally fine. But even if you want to defend ownership, not wanting to pay the tax, which I don't believe, but if I know a lot of people don't really care about that, a lot of fans just defend it and say, the Hawks weren't going to be good anyway. Why would they pay it? Number one, you shouldn't care in my mind about what the owner pays. But anyway, even with that said, even if the entire goal was to be under the tax, they still could have spent $10 million or so on that Wes Matthews roster spot and used the mid-level on a player that would have been a lot better than Wes Matthews, who I like, but they would have actually found a rotation guy, a high-end rotation guy, probably $10 million. So that was a loss. That was a shortcoming. It was foreseeable. I didn't understand why they didn't do it at the time. They were nowhere near the tax. At least if you could say, again, if they were 2 years ago, they couldn't have done much more without going over the tax line. Again, I wouldn't have cared about that, but at least they were close to the line and they stayed under it barely. This year, they were nowhere near the line. They obviously had a mechanism with the mid-level to go much higher while improving their roster and staying under the tax line. And they just chose not to do that. So there you go. I say all that to set up. The rest of the podcast is going to be about the roster situation, both player-wise and also cap-wise. So we'll start with the player side of things. I'll do that side first. Then I'll come back to the money side. So for next year, 24-25, season that begins in October, the Hawks currently have 10 guys under contract on guaranteed deals. Those 10 players are as follows. They have 3 guards, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Kobe Lufkin. They have 2 guys who I would say are like pure wings, Bogey and AJ Griffin. Then they have 3 forwards, Jalen Johnson, DeAndre Hunter, and Mo Gay. And they have 2 centers, Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu. Those are the 10 guys on guaranteed contracts. Then they have 2 players who are under contract but on non-guaranteed deals. Garrison Matthews, who has a team option that's also non-guaranteed, and then Bruno Fernando is non-guaranteed. So that's 12 guys under contract, 10 guaranteed, 2 non-guaranteed. Then they have 3 guys who are probably going to be restricted free agents. I say probably because they're not technically restricted until they actually get the qualifying offer, but these 3 are projected to be restricted. Saddiq Bey, Beat Krejci, and Seth Lundy. Then they have 3 guys who project as free agents that are not restricted. Wes Matthews, Trent Forrest, and Dylan Windler. Obviously, Windler's coming off a 2-way. Wes was on a 1-year deal, as was Trent, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think that Beat Krejci is very likely to be back with the team, not only because they have a low cap hold, he won't get a ton of money, they like him a lot, but also the Hawks have been very outward about their decision. They were happy with not giving him a new contract. I'll be shocked if he's not back in some form. So I'm penciling him in, even if it's not on the roster right now. Bey is a little bit trickier. Somebody could offer him a bunch of money this summer. And given that he probably can't play until the second half of the season, given the torn ACL, there's a real decision there. If someone wants to overpay him, the Hawks could conceivably let him go. I still probably would guess at this moment in late April that Saddiq is probably, at least more likely than not, going to be back. But no guarantees there. I'm way less confident about that because while he's restricted, the injury throws a big curveball into that situation. It's really hard to tell what a market's going to be like for a guy who probably just can't help you that much this season, both for the Hawks or any other team that's trying to bid for him. So TBD on Saddiq. Even with that, though, through that lens, the Hawks needed another forward no matter what. That's the most obvious thing in the world, but I'll just say it again. I said it a lot this season, since August, basically. They were a forward short, even with Saddiq Bey healthy. That's not really up for dispute, in my opinion. They had 3 guys they trusted to play forward minutes this year. It was Hunter, Johnson, and Bey. Yes, they have Mo Gay long-term. Super intriguing player. Still going to be a rookie-adjacent guy next year, having not played very much this year. Sure. They had Wes Matthews. He played a little bit this year, but they essentially had 3 guys they trusted at forward. You could say that Vít Krejci would be added to that, but Vít is, number one, a pure wing. He's much more of a 2-3 than a 3-4, given how slight he is physically. Yeah, again, Mogay helps you, but you can't pencil Mogay in to huge minutes in year 2 because he didn't play a lot this year. Even if the flash is there, I like him a lot. There's some uncertainty there still. Plus, even if you were to be optimistic on Veet and Mogay, you still need, for me, another guy who can give you real minutes at the forward spots with no other changes. That's the only glaring positional need. Now, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't run it back. I would not run it back. This team just produced a -2 net rating for the season. Yes, they had injuries, but even before the injuries, they weren't playing that well. I believe that running it back is not a good option. It's not even a reasonable option, in my opinion, to just bring everybody back. But if they did, the only position, again, not skill set, not trait, position that they actually have a actual weakness at is forward. They have 3-point guards that are functional. They have enough wing guys. If everybody's healthy, they have two centers. Like, all that said, they need a forward. They're going to need a forward no matter what happens, and that's my opinion on the matter. That's the roster reset. We'll have more on that. I promise you we'll have deep dives into all the players, what they do need, what they don't need. That's just kind of the very broad strokes on the roster and where they stand right now. And I'm doing that in part to set up what I'm about to talk about in a second when it comes to the salary cap and luxury tax. Before we get to that, though, a word from our friends at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, as well as baseball being in full swing, and FanDuel's #1 place to be for each and every game, as well as America's #1 sportsbook on the whole. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in terms of dollars in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 in your pocket you can use to bet on hoops, baseball, hockey, and much more. Bet on all of your favorite baseball and basketball players and teams as well with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app at FanDuel Sportsbook is very easy to use. They have everything you're looking for in the sports betting space. They have money lines and over-unders, player props, future bets, game props, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. That, of course, includes the NBA, NFL, WNBA, college basketball, college football, college baseball, MLB, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. Now, it's also fun to find some of the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we just need the chance to get something off our chest. Whether something big or small, actually stuff can really start to get to you if you actually have that happen, have that sink in, and it's probably lots of stuff out. Especially as someone who happens to be unbiased in your life that can just listen to what you are saying. And sometimes I want to tell you about something, and maybe for a few of you might actually understand it. And really, I have some unease about the state of the media industry right now. I've lost some work in recent days. It's kind of wearing on me in some respects. I'm not talking about Hawk stuff. I'm just talking about whether there's actually jobs people like me in the way that I do, and podcasting and writing, etc. Of course, not the most lifelong topic for everybody or the most intense thing in the world, but therapy can actually be different for everybody. That's what makes it beautiful in some ways. Most of us, including me, have bigger problems to stuff about sports and media, but it's quite important to let things off of our chest every once in a while. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try today. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. And the place to go is BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, the place to go is BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, now for the fun or not so fun part about the podcast, depending on what you are into. I get feedback in either direction, whether I'm either too nerdy and too much in the weeds or not nerdy enough, not in the weeds enough. And part of that is I'm trying to appeal to every Hawks fan. So there's some stuff that's simple, some stuff that's not, and I try to weave that stuff in. So if you have questions ever, let me know, but I'm trying to check all those boxes. So anyway, the Hawks, again, will have the mid-level exception available to them if they want to use it. It would help them, but everything, and I mean everything, roster-wise, points back to the team's willingness to pay the luxury tax. I know that people always want to know about cap space, quote unquote, but as I'll touch on more, they are already way, way, way over the salary cap. Yes, they could trade Clint or DeAndre or even DeJounte or Trey or whatever for savings, but they still wouldn't get super below the cap without some serious machinations. So if you're thinking about cap space, I wouldn't be thinking about cap space. It's very, very unlikely the Hawks are going to have meaningful cap space. But anyway, I'll lay out the roster, and I will do it from a cap perspective, keeping in mind that, again, I'm not even going to go beyond this year. Right now, I'll do a future episode at some point when I talk about like Jalen's extension and what's going to be on the books beyond this year, whether they keep Trey or DeJounte or both and all that stuff. Hunter's contract is long-term, Okongwu. But for now, I'm focusing on this coming season when I talk about this stuff right now. And again, I mentioned the 10 guys before that are on guaranteed contracts. Those 10 guys combined to make $158.3 million next season. Quickly, that is Trey, DeJounte, Kobe, Bogey, Griffin, Jalen, DeAndre, Moge, Capella, and Okonwu. Those 10 guys, 158.3. That number jumps to about 163 or so with Garrison and Bruno. Not a certainty at all. Again, those guys are non-guaranteed, but just for math's sake, keep them on the books. That number is about 8.7 million below the tax line. Not the cap line, the tax line, with 12 players on the roster. And you have to have at least 14 players on the roster, and roster holds cost money. So already the Hawks are up against the tax with 12 guys. Then you have Saddiq Bey, whose cap hold is $13.67 million. Now, he'll count on that number until he has a new contract or until the Hawks renounce his rights, which I don't think they're going to do. So his qualifying offer is less than that. It's about $8.5 million. It's not 100% that the Hawks are going to offer that. I think they're probably going to, even with the injury. But it's brutal timing, by the way, for Saddiq with the injury. Everybody knows that. But he was in line for a lot of money and a lot more than this. But I think they're going to give him a qualifying offer to get his match rights, etc. I'll cover that a lot. But from what I heard, they're going to actually at least give him the QO. So factor that in at least. His next deal is going to be real money, even if less than he would have gotten pre-injury. But even, by the way, beyond Saddiq, a first-round pick, which the Hawks have in the lottery, let's just say it's the 10th pick, which is their most likely spot. That pick costs between $5 and $6 million next year. That salary slot is already on your books. So already, right now, let's just say this. In this perfect world, or not perfect world, however you want to view it, you let Saddiq Bey go, right? You pick up the options on guarantees on Garrison and Bruno. You make the first-round pick. They'd have 13 guys on the roster, including the pick, and you'd have like $2.5 million below the tax line with an open roster spot. So yes, they could save a few bucks by cutting Garrison or cutting Bruno, but Garrison's almost making exactly the minimum. And at the minimum, I would definitely keep Garrison. Definitely, he's better than most minimum guys. He's not going to change your life, but he's a very useful minimum player. Bruno makes a little bit more. If they cut him, I won't be too surprised. But even then, you're not saving more than like $500,000 ish, even towards the minimum. So like, what are you going to do there money-wise? So even mine. Oh, by the way, keep that in mind. That 13 players does not include a single dollar for Vit Krejci, who every Hawks fan loves at this point and wants to keep and wants to pay. That has zero for Vit. So let's just say this. Even if the Hawks chose to simply run it back, let Saddiq go, sign Vit to a modest contract, they're already in the tax. Doing nothing else. That's tough because, look, if you've been listening for a few years now, I pretty much guaranteed on this show the last 2 years that the Hawks were not going to go over the tax line. 2 years ago in particular, I got yelled at a lot for saying it. I was right. They never did it. And I heard that. I was sourced on that. They never went over. I was very clear on that. And yes, people will always point to what Tony Ressler has said 5 years ago and his on-record comments about how he'll spend money when they have to spend money, etc. To this point, they have never paid the tax in his regime. We'll see. This year, to be very clear, I am not guaranteeing they won't go over yet. I might get to that point, but right now I don't have the sourcing on that, so I'm not saying they're not going to go over. I will always be skeptical until they actually do. But I'm not saying that it's for sure this year yet. But let's just say again, they could do nothing except for bring back the band, let Saddiq go for zero, sign Vit for like a few million, and they're already in the tax line. Over the tax line, I should say. So that's pretty scary if you're looking at the money situation. And again, as a reminder, if you're a new listener or new Hawks follower, the last 2 seasons in a row, they have traded a starter. 2 years ago was Kevin Huerter. Last year was John Collins. Not expressly and only to save money, but it was a huge, huge factor in both transactions to get under the tax line 2 years in a row. I'm not saying they're going to do that again, but it would not shock me if they traded Clint to get over the tax line. We'll see. Anyway, they're going to want to keep Vit. I think they're going to want to keep Bey if the number becomes reasonable. Seth Lundy's a free agent. It'll be cheap, I would imagine. But again, crucially, they're going to need more depth and more talent. This is not a good basketball team this year. So running it back is not sexy anyway. And then you got to get better. So obviously the Trey DeJounte thing is the number one talking point and the number one decision. It already is that. I get it. But the willingness to spend is high on the list because it trickles down to everything. Roster building wise, in the future, in the short term, can you build a team with this structure with Jalen's going to be making a lot of money very soon? Trey makes a lot of money. DeJounte makes a lot of money, etc. It's hard. Hunter makes a lot of money already. If they're more willing to spend, they could use the MLE to improve the roster this year. It wouldn't bring a star, but it could add a real piece. And the Hawks also have the trade exception from John Collins' trade of $23 million or so. They could actually bring somebody in. That expires on July 7th. Without going into crazy detail there, that allows them to trade for someone who makes that number, $23 million or less, without having to send any salary back out. But you have to pay that person, and you'd be going into the tax by a lot to go ahead and do that. So, like, pick your favorite player at $18 million, add that guy to the roster. Like, great, that's great. But is Tony going to pay for that? I don't think so. At least I don't believe that he definitely will. So they have some options. I'm not trying to paint a scary picture. They have options. And look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I will be surprised if they run it back. I think that everyone is available except for Jalen for sure and probably Trey. I use the word probably, as I talked about with Tyler on a recent show. But everybody else, like especially, I know for a fact, DeJounte, Hunter, Capella, Kongwu even probably is going to be available to some degree. Any of the bench guys, young guys. I mean, Kobe they like a lot. AJ is going to be available. Like Moge they like a lot. Those guys are different situations, but there's going to be trade talks. We'll see what they end up doing. But just keep in mind, if the tax line is a barrier that Tony is unwilling to cross, that just handicaps them. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you can't build a team. It just means that you have to make that a part of the calculus every time. So if you trade Capella, you're going to try to do that while getting cheaper. If you trade DeJounte even, you're going to do that while getting cheaper because the Hawks want to bring back Veit and bring back Bay. The money is the money, and the list is the list. And this is kind of actually going to be a theme all summer long, I think, as we'll talk about much more. But the process failures of the Hawks the last several seasons have continued to build on themselves to this point. It happened with the roster this year. It happened with, prioritizing the wrong things, cost-cutting moves. Like I said, trading Herter and Collins for non-basketball reasons, for financial reasons, paying guys too much or paying guys when they didn't have to, giving Hunter an extension a year early, not squeezing Collins when they could have. All those things, like it's all kind of coming up. The Capella extension, all those things are coming home to roost right now. And obviously, number one on the list maybe is the DeJounte trade, overpaying in that deal, all those things. So, like, this is the situation. The Hawks are limited asset-wise. They're out picks. They are expensive. At least they're not expensive like by luxury tax standards, but they're expensive in terms of like it's not easy to move if they want to stay under the tax line. So all that said, lots of stuff there. I would say ultimately a lot of choices revolve around their appetite to spend. And again, crucially, it's not as black and white this time around as it was last year, where the Hawks actively traded a guy to get under the tax line, but they're coming off of a bad season. Keep that in mind. Like as much talent as they have, as much intrigue as they have, they were not good this year. 36 wins. Yes, there were injuries, etc. But we'll see if this is a hard line again for the ownership group, etc. Keep in mind again that Bay and Veit are not even on these lists, and they have a lot of money committed to a lot of guys. So keep that in mind. We'll be there throughout the summer talking about these topics, trade stuff, player review stuff, draft stuff, free agency stuff. It's all going to be there, but hopefully this is sort of a good primer on the roster. We will have more, I assure you, but it was a good time and sort of in concert with Bogey's snub in my mind and the incentive stuff to kind of reset now. And I'll have guests on in the future. Probably going to be a lot of guest-driven episodes as well as mailbags. So I said it before at the top of the podcast. If you have questions, send them in on all those platforms, either Twitter or email or reviews, etc. Also follow the show on Twitter in general at BT Rowland. At BT Rowland is me. At Austin Hawks is the show. And subscribe, rate, review. The best thing to possibly do to help the show is to go ahead and subscribe on multiple channels. That's the best thing to do is auto download, Apple, Spotify, stream on YouTube, all those things. Also, if you want to support me individually, that's not the show, but just my work on Atlanta sports, it's patreon.com/BT Roll. I do some Hawks writing, I do some Braves writing there, some Braves audio, some press conference stuff. All that stuff's all going to be in there in that same place. And I really do appreciate all the support. So anyway, I'll sign off now. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you all later on this week.